Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Blackwell.
Yeah.
Go ahead, make my day.
I said, what's the date? 'Cause you just looked.
Tom would like you to go out as a class and make a sacred fire in the sacred fire area. When he comes in, he'll probably say it's over here, but we know it's not. It's in Chippewa. So put everything that you can into it. Try to be in the silence. Use whatever you've learned already in this week about choosing which pieces of wood, learning from the wood as you're gathering it. But there's no special intent going into the fire except a sacred feeling to it. Normal, probably half hour or 45-minute burn time, with a pile of wood next to it to maybe get another half hour out of it. Any questions? All right. When half of you come back in, we'll give a 10-minute call.
That circle with those benches in Chippewa,
Yeah.
is not really conducive to a sacred fire. Well, you got the benches. How are you gonna do the dance with a sacred fire and hop over benches? That might.
Come in on the corner. Remove the bench.
Anybody have ideas?
Adapt.
Yeah,
Adapt.
We could also
around the benches.
Yeah, freeform it. Yeah.
that, or we could also move it
Yeah.
like down by the beach.
Like we had to adapt to the directional poles in grandfather's camp. So that's normally you don't do all that dancing around unless there's a pole there. So we'll try to do the best you can.
Yep.
If for some reason it's absolutely not doable, then come back and we'll choose another area if we have
Well,
to.
there's the beach area that's pretty open too, but that's a little ways.
You guys okay?
Yeah, you can
Yeah,
stand
guys,
within
you've
the
got a
bench.
few minutes to think about it, so just be like the coyote, adapt, see what you can figure out. Like Charlie said, if it's absolutely impossible, then come back and we'll help you out, but I think you can do it.
Yep.
You know?
I think the core is in the directions, and you can do it all the
Thanks for that.
book aside.
All right. Yay.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll say it's good enough.
Let's go with that. That was a beautiful fire that you guys built. It was, you know, sometimes when you're in the middle of it, you can't tell, but from the outside, it was just good. I don't know how to say it, but anyway, it just felt good. The whole area changed, even back towards the building here. So thank you for whatever you were doing. Tom wants you to take the 10-minute break and start on a group fire in each of your areas, a prayed-for fire. Same parameters, you know, half hour, 45-minute burn, and enough wood to maybe build it up again a second time. No particular intent to this second fire either, just that it's prayed for, it has reverence as you're building it. You can use the silence that we've been learning all week long and try to put all that energy into whatever the wood that you're choosing to put into it. Any questions? We all have good group areas? Yeah. Okay. Good luck, and when half of you are back, we'll give a 10-minute call again.
All right, gang. First of all, my apology. Yesterday, for some reason, I just could not get warm. I had a sore throat. And the last couple of days, you notice what I had left of a beard is gone, you know, a couple of days before the class, because I broke out in a horrible rash. And nobody could figure out why. And I'm getting worse and worse and worse. And then yesterday, I was totally out of it, couldn't get warm. I figured, oh my God, I'm getting sick. I went home and it just got worse. I mean, through the night, finally this morning I said, screw it, I went to the clinic. Turns out that they think I'm having a bad reaction to the drug that the heart specialist put me on. So they took me off of it, and I went off of it yesterday because I suspected it might be it. Hives and stuff are a good indicator, you know, that you're fucked up. Excuse the expletives, but I'm sorry, we didn't miss anything. I wanted to be here to set this up, but the elders took care of that. Now, I want to do this, before I get into any debriefing or anything of yesterday's exercises, what I want you to do is a simple exercise, but I remember when I did this as a kid, it had very, very profound impact on me, because you got to remember, this is stuff that I did in the later years with grandfather. So we had been through the sensing of presence, you know, where you walk out to your sit area and you sense presence and you feel things moving away from you or watching you, and it's like, whoa, is it always like this? You know, yeah, it is. But this is like the next step up. This is taking you into a realm that, for instance, let's say you were going to go do a exorcism or a fairly heavy-duty healing. On your way to that patient, you would participate in an exercise such as you're going to do. Now, we don't have a patient, so right away we have to rely on our need to learn, my need to show you this. And it's, like I said, barely need enough. But I remember grandfather saying the exact same thing to me, so my expectations were not high. I was pretty well blown away by the exercise, because it took that exercise that we had done years ago where you sensed presence and, you know, walked out to the sit area, and had been doing that, you know, pretty much through the whole process the next few years leading to this point. But when we got into this one, this was like it opened an entirely different arena, like a different level of communication, a different level of knowing. Now, basically, it's very simple. I'm going to ask you to walk out toward your personal sit area. Not your group, your personal sit area. And when you're about, I don't know, maybe about 20 yards or so from it, you know, you want a piece of real estate. I then want you to start moving. First of all, in a foxwalk. Second, wide angle vision, of course. But then I want you to start moving in silence. But you're adding to it now that ebb and flow of that laser-like vision. So what's happening, it doesn't make a difference whether you start out here and in and out and in, but don't do, real quickly. Just let it happen and let your eyes fall on whatever grabs them. You're not making a conscious choice. It's like it's being made for you. But as you go through this vision, as you pull back, you're communicating. As you pull forward, you're also sending out your message. So you're going to start almost like a multiple levels of conversation that are not, using words, though words could be part of the equation. And that silent, penetrating gaze, you want to get it to a point where it becomes very fluid, and you're kind of paying attention on all levels. As you're in the silence, so you're already acutely aware and highly observant. And you're in the now. So as things come into you, pay attention to all realms on all levels, meaning flesh, force, spirit, sacred silence, temples, and beyond. Because the communication will happen that way. Sometimes all at once from the place of the final oneness or the final silence. Other times it might be an encounter from the spirit world or a keeper of the force or something in the flesh that grabs your attention. Don't try to categorize it or analyze it, just let it happen. The more relaxed and fluid you can allow this to become, the more powerful will be the connection and the communication. But this becomes a device where it's almost like consulting with the lineage, the elders, before you go to do battle with, some dark entity. And it adds that final knowledge. Rick said, in a way, when we use this in real time for a real situation, he said, my God, it's like putting on armor. As you walk down almost like a reverse gauntlet where, you're chest protecting, the helmet, the sword, all of that. It's like building up all the things you need. So by the time you get to the patient, it's amazing what you know about the patient and how you deal with it. And Rick and I, after it was all over, of course, knew exactly what each of us had to do. It was like we had sat down for a half an hour and say, you do this, you do that, I'll do that. And it choreographed out so beautifully. It couldn't have worked out in a better way. And that's like, and also keep in mind, it is a way of, in your daily existence, checking in with a higher level of silence. Like I beg people, please, several times a day, go in and out of silence. And I mean that in a very profound way, just get into that oneness, get into that now, get into that awareness, just to check in. And you'll find that it stays with you longer and longer and longer until there's always part of you that is in the silence and always aware of it. Now this one, with this purpose, takes you to a little bit higher level where you're starting to glean information. And a lot of times you'll feel called to do so. It won't be a conscious choice. It'll be like, oop, better check in. Like you would do I got to check in with my friend to make sure they're all right, that kind of thing. Take your time with this, folks. I'm going to give you about 25 minutes, okay? And when you get back, I'd like to discuss it before lunch because we're going to start using this after lunch, and I want to start getting into some realms of darkness dealing with all of this that you've put together thus far. Let's do it. Now, before we talk about this, I just want to, before lunch, I just want to get your take on this because it's going to determine kind of how I'm going to go with this afternoon. I remember when I came back off of this walk, I had problem putting it into words and describing it to grandfather, and I remember the best word that I had was density. It seemed like it was much more dense in spirit, force, whatever, than I have ever encountered before. The other thing that I felt is very connected, rooted and centered, kind of like a feeling of having an epiphany but not knowing what that epiphany is, you know, that kind of thing, that knowing but not knowing. And as I backed up and thought about it and listened to Rick, he was virtually articulating the same things I was feeling. At the end of that, I felt more confident, more focused, and as if I was on the verge of a revelation of some sort, which actually took place not long after. But with us, at first glance, we didn't have a goal or a vision other than to learn. But then we realized in the final analysis that there was a goal and a vision that we had forgotten about, a healing that grandfather was going to take care of later on in that week. And somehow we had tapped into that consciousness. We knew exactly when and where it was going to happen and what he was going to ask us to collect. And we were right on with it. And some of the feedback from folks at home, from Brant, I had a squirrel almost run into me before he even noticed while I was in the silence. That's the neat thing about silence. It also takes you to a deeper level of invisibility. And it's amazing. If that is your mission, invisibility, that takes you to the higher forms of it. Just a warning so you don't scare the crap out of an animal and or they run into you. From John, noticed that it was sort of automatic. And he said, I did notice a higher energy level. From Michael, I think it is, or Michelle. Which is it, Michael or Michelle? I don't know.
Michael.
Okay. I received some guidance and also feel filled up with an energy afterwards. It feels like silent energy. I also just received a text message related to a silence communication indicating some positive developments taking place in the situation. The other thing about this walk is that, you know, we're always working on something as children of the light, whether it be a healing or a communication or helping someone. And you find that even though at first glance a walk like this seems like it only has to do with the walk, actually has to do with furthering your endeavors on another level. And like confirmation of developments taking place like in the emails and stuff like that. How about with you folks? Did you feel the difference in this type of walk compared to way back when you did this the first time with, you know, the either radiance or with the sensing of presence? Different? Yes. Very good. When I say that, to you, does it feel like a different level and kind of energy that you're used to dealing with?
Yes.
Is that unanimous? Put up your hands if that's the case. Fucking cool. Okay, excuse the superlatives. All right, let's grab lunch. I know the way we're going to go with this. This is cool because I kind of expected it, but I want to go with this new level. This is going to be cool after lunch. All right, let's do it, gang. Okay. Trying to find a way to go next. especially with this, which I hadn't planned on teaching. Like I said, we wouldn't even be getting into the first realm of this until, like Friday. And we're just way ahead in the stuff that I had intended, but I don't believe in coincidences because it shows me what you're capable of. But I've been trying to rework the best way to take where I can leave something out that I don't think is necessary. I don't have to make that step, that kind of thing. That's the agonizing thing about the classes, is to find out what people can understand and what needs a little more explanation. But anyway, from now on, just for simplicity of words, when we would use at first, Rick and I, between ourselves, the tidal flow of silent penetrating gaze. Now, that's a lot of words, and it get cumbersome. It's like the spirit that moves in and through all things. So Rick and I summed up that whole process with just simply tidal vision, okay, as in tides. And whenever that is used, it is the process where, whether you start out with that laser pinpoint and then bring it out to the wide angle and then into the surrender or the silence, or vice versa. That refers to that process, the silent penetrating gaze. And like I said, back then there was no real mention much of lasers. It was more like something you'd see on a comic book or something like that. Though I don't know if we'd ever called it that. So from now on, I'm taught when I say the tidal vision, that is what I mean. The process, because that's a very, very important process. Now, we're going to get into where this deals with combating darkness. And when you deal with the tidal vision, you are dealing with a very, very strong, infinitely powerful consciousness of energy. And it tends to terrorize the dark forces because of its power. Now, just keep in mind a note on surrender. You still have the ability to use surrender. You'll find that sometimes I say, surrender and then do such and such and such, or surrender and go to silence. You don't really go to silence, as you know, you become the silence, okay? Going to is misleading. You become it. And you allow yourself to become it by opening yourself to it. That's all that is needed. Oftentimes, in the lifestyle all of us lead, where we're constantly bombarded with have-tos and shoulds and needs and this and that and the other thing, a lot of times we get so caught up that it's difficult to go right into silence. So even though in the process of surrender, you lose part of yourself, you don't really, it's just got a chokehold on the voice in the back of your head, so to speak. It's a good practice to sometimes use surrender before you enter the silence. It's like cleaning the slate. In fact, there's certain times where I know I don't really need to use it, I will use it anyway, because in case there's something hidden or something unresolved in me, that issue that I got to get rid of. So that's like kind of starting all over again, from square one, where there's nothing cluttering up the process. And remember that when you start dealing with these higher realms of power and energy, all of the processes are set up with that empowered need, that empowered vision, purpose, that kind of thing. That's set up in the beginning, and then the process just carries it through. That's like putting a stake in the ground and saying, this is what I want to do, or this is what I've been directed to do. And then, you know, empower that vision. And the more I look at it, in my perceived failures, and there's no such thing as failure, providing you learn from it, quote, grandfather in the lineage. But my perceived failures have all to do with that element of empowering vision. Where even when we're 15, 16, 17 years old, grandfather, before we'd start an exercise, remember to empower your vision, grandsons. So for him to say that, even when we knew it, that was stating the power. And that is what, you know, a lot of people, they think, okay, I need to do this, and that's it. And then they wonder why they fall flat on their face or they get iffy results. And that's because you didn't take the time to empower it. And the further you can move it outside the self, the more powerful it is going to become. You know, even to things like, you know, are inner vision directed or directed by the Creator or directed by the temples or whatever. And it's not a choice of ourself. It's still good to empower it, because that really, it's like the fuel that empowers the whole thing. The flame, the burner, is the actual process. This all goes in to take place. Now, just something totally unrelated, but something that has been gnawing at me. We've been blessed and cursed with two things, or one thing actually. There was two places this week that we were supposed to go over to the primitive camp, and that is basically inaccessible. And it would just beat the hell out of every vehicle out there to try to get back there. So you consider I had planned 2 trips in and 2 separate set of exercises. That's a hell of a lot of time. So I'm thinking to myself, I have no trouble filling it. I mean, I got more shit that I could teach, but I started to think to myself that this is something that has gone back for ages. Back when we first started to use the Boy Scout camp. It was, I think Frank and Malcolm and I were having a conversation, and this is in the first year we had the Boy Scout camp, when Malcolm said, you know, there's no real connection, portal, between this camp and the primitive camp other than what people carry in their hearts. For instance, at the place I live today, which is the Edge property, we always called it, there's a portal there that we created, Grandfather Rick and I, that is a direct link back to Grandfather's camp area. It's a spiritual portal that the more we use it, the stronger it gets. And it's been there, you know, for, Jesus, since I was 11 years old or so, 12 years old. And I still use it to this day. If I have to make contact with that primitive camp and I need a very clear picture, I'll go stand in that portal. And that gives me a direct connection to camp in a very profound way, where I could, sit inside the house or in the backyard and make a connection. It would not be as clear as when I'm standing in that portal. So I'm thinking about it after all these years, and this subject has come up time after time after time. I'm thinking maybe it's time to create a portal, but which would basically teach you how to do it in the way the grandfather and the lineage did it. But you could actually use this in your own home, you know, even inside your own home, if you set by a piece of the altar. But I just wanted to throw that out there. I mean, it doesn't demand a whole hell of a lot of work. We're not clearing real estate that, you know, that's the size of this classroom, you know. It's just a kind of like, you've all no doubt seen grandfather's sit area, his sacred area. It's just a tiny little path that leads down between a couple of big trees, you know, and that's one of his sit areas. Something like that nature. Something smaller than your area, you know, that your class area. But think about it, and we'll come back to it later on. Anyway, I don't want to get into the process yet to hammer that home, but I want to move on to part 2 of what you just did. And I'm sorry for you, those of you who went down to your sit area and found it forested, you know, clear cut. I mean, I know that's gotta hurt. I've had so many of my sacred areas decimated like that, and you can't get over it, you know, it just beats you up. But, you know, it is what it is, unfortunately. I still, stubborn enough, I'll use the same area, even if they put a house in the way. What are you doing in our living room? Having conversations with demons. Why? Anyway. You walked down to your sit area and you went in and out of the tidal vision. And you felt the whole landscape changing, the layers of it, you know, whatever. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is a silent walk again, but this time it is going to be with your partner. Now, once you get outside, you and your partner, decide which direction you want to go. That's the only decision you're going to make together as a partnership. And exactly where you're going to start this exercise. That's just so you're not all clustered up here. Then, you're going to walk together. No destination. No time, no expectation, absolutely no words, sign language, anything else exchanged. You're going to find as you both enter the silence of this walk, there is a bond, a communication that is formed. A silent conversation of knowing. And you'll find yourself at first, as Rick and I did, we were kind of like in and out of it in a way. And we could tell where, you know, I'd feel the connection was lost somehow. And I'd look at Rick, and Rick look at me. We're not supposed to do that, you know, but like we knew we lost it. So we'd refocus, go to wide angle vision, and go back into it. As you go through this, as you do this silent walk, like you did on the walk down here, go in and out of that tidal vision, very slow, rhythmically, fluidly. And just experience it together. You may find that you're directly opposite of, you know, your partner's going into the laser, you're coming out of it. That's fine. You're not even going to be discussing that. Where it all comes together is nearing the end. When you start, after it's all over, you start sitting down and talking about your journey. Now, for the journey itself, because you have to get with your partner, you have to get your asses out there someplace to start this thing, I'm going to give you about 25, maybe 30 minutes. When you hear the call out, come right in. Get with your partner. I don't care, you should be with your partner. Sit down and discuss it, the journey. Remember, there's no discussion during it. Little nuances, little things that have emerged, feelings, sensations, goings and comings that are not quite here but not quite there, you know, that kind of thing. You're going to find as you talk about it, there's layers of this journey. There is the physical journey, which has many things in common, but then there's journeys in the spirit, in the force, in the temples, all over the place. Discuss all of it. And I'm going to give you some time to do that because that discussion is going to really open your eyes to a communication that's so deep and profound and far-reaching that it amazes you. And you realize, wow, I could use this with patience. I could use this with anyone I choose or have been directed to use it. So I'll give you some time to get out there. When you hear the call out, please call out loud and clear to come in. And again, don't decide where you're going to go. Just let it happen. More like drifting, buffeted by the winds and the sensations and the landscape more than anything else. No cognizant decision, so to speak. I think you'll find it quite enlightening, to say the least. All right, let's do it, gang. Elders, pay attention to the time, okay? I'm going to start out reading some of the feedback from folks at home. I feel bad for them in a way because they had to do this walk by themselves. And, you know, that's one of the problems with the online classes, that most of the students are by themselves, so I can't really include a partnership other than a sympathetic observer or whatever. But yet, this came back from Joe Pollock. I think it really sums it up in a great way. My partner, Jenna, is vaguely versed in a silence, surrender, and wide-angle vision, so I asked her to go into silence while flowing from tunnel vision gazes to wide-angle vision as we walked without destination. He's got a side note. Of course, she didn't take part in any of the dark stuff, but in our discussion, we found that we focused on several of the same items during the tidal vision walk and had a similar theme of thought in a friendly part of the brain. The baby quieted completely during the walk. I feel that doing this on a longer walk would take a communication between partners further. Yeah, absolutely. This will tap into levels that words will never achieve. Like I always tell people, you know, when I used to have to live in Florida and I'd have to be gone from my boys, they'd say, you know, I love you, Dad. But then when they put those little arms around my neck, that said it all. You know, there was no words. There was just that deep, visceral knowing and understanding that words could not even come close to describing. And this is the kind of level of communication that this gets you to. A deep, visceral, intimate understanding of each other without the need for words or useless emotions or second guessing or all the other garbage that goes about in superficial, you know, discussions people have. Here's another word from Brenda, feedback on silent walk. Now, of course, I guess she was alone. Went with the snowstorm since the dog was all about playing in the snow, not just walking. For a very short moment, I could feel several layers at the same time. That I love, because it tells me you're getting there, where you can really feel the layers upon layers of things, the concentrics on concentrics. The storm, the snow, the storm's connection to the water all over as an element and then as an elemental. I felt the call of the ocean to my blood and my body on a visceral level, astounding. One from Steve. I felt the towardness very strongly, having no destination but where I'm being pulled by a secret thread attached to my heart, while the environment pulled my attention to what I needed to see and experience at the time. Then the surface of the earth moved my steps in a certain slow style, direction. When I passed by certain areas, the intelligence that spoke to me with impressions of what I should know now and remember for later and sequence opened my knowingness. That is the kind of thing that I'm looking for in that kind of communication that runs so deep. You especially see it with old friends or older couples that have been around each other forever. I saw this in Grandfather's People. So often we'd be sitting by the campfire and not a word being spoken, but all of a sudden somebody would chuckle over here. And then two other people would laugh. And it was like, okay, where's this conversation that I'm not privy to? And then I realized where this conversation was taking place, on a silence level. And at first I fumbled with it, but it was the exact same place that Grandfather used to communicate with Rick and I. That's why one word from Grandfather or one looks would speak volumes, because it was in that look that he could convey so much power in that gaze, that the conveyance that happens. When you walked with your partner, did you feel a deeper level of communication? Put up your hands if you did. Cool. Okay, put them down. Nice. Now, I'm going to leave this up to you. From folks at home, we've had a number of things, communication saying, do you think Tom could do the portals and the building of them and making of them? Keep in mind that this originally was not part of this class, okay? But, I'm looking at, I've got time that I had slated for something else that is not going to happen because we can't get there. We're going to do the something else here, but the time it takes to get there and back and there and back and all of that hoopla, I could put the portals in. Now, I don't have my notebook or my notes for the portals, but that's easy enough to get. Do you want to go with the power of portals, is a good way to put it. If you do, put up your hands. I think it's unanimous. Okay. Most people don't know how to make them. They don't know how to use them. They don't know how to build them. They don't know what goes into them. And while you were walking, I just jotted down some notes of some of the highlights of portals, which we will refine later on. I sent the elders out to find a potential site for a portal. And ironically, it's a directly between I'm using Grandfather's Camp. Now, I could use any other area back there, but it seems to be the camp is the center, as I've always called it. And it's not just for you that you're making this portal. It's for every class that ever takes place here. Whether it's a basic philosophy, if that ever happens here, or, you know, one of the more advanced classes that would happen here. So it will complete the equation, so to speak. It's something we've never had here before. I've always relied on my connection to the area and the people who were in the class, their connection. And this becomes stronger. Let me just go through my notes, and they may not make sense at first. We'll get into this, and I figure what we're going to do is do this in pieces. Okay, so we'll do a little bit, we'll come back, go to something else, do a little bit, that kind of thing. Portals generally come in three types, okay? A medicine bundle and a staff are two different types. And of course, the area, the landscape. Now, what is a portal? Well, a portal is something used both physically and spiritually to connect a person to an area, place, to another, or many others. Keep in mind that that portal does not have to just connect to one place. It could connect to 10. But it's you and the need at hand will determine which place or places you want to draw to you. You see, the beauty about a staff and a medicine bundle is that that bundle and that staff are the portals. Whereas if it's on the landscape, it is that place that is the portal. So the staff and the medicine bundle you can move. The place you can't. This would be very suitable for a place because we meet here. And a lot of people, it would be hard, you know, because to have a staff or a bundle, certainly we could use it. But then it would only be for those people that are in proximity of that bundle to get its full power. So here we would decide to go to the place. And as a connection from this property here, the whole area, to Grandfather's Camp. It becomes a landmark that is highly spiritually charged, a conduit that links one to the other, combining the power of both or many, and creating a harmonic energy greater than all of its parts. Now, I'll, of course, write all this up on the board as we progress with this. But basically, that's what a portal does. It connects one area to another, and so on. It's like a conduit, but the power it produces is not just the power of point A and point B. It's the power of the harmonic between them. It's almost like at times, like we've used portals, and I've certain portals with Coyote Thunder that the people standing there with longer hair could actually feel their hair blowing toward the ground, and it's just flat ground. It connects place to place, people to place, or people to people. You can use these conduits and places to connect each other. We've done that a lot in classes where I say to your group, meet here, you know, pick a date and meet here spiritually. You have a landmark, you know, that kind of thing. You know, examples is Rick and I had medicine bundles for each other. He would give me a stone that he had collected, or a fragment of bone, or a piece of lock of his hair. And we kept building on these bundles so that when I go home, I can pick out that bundle, I can attach right to Rick, right there. And we also have a staff that is for each other. The laughing thing is that on my staff, I have a toenail that he ripped off accidentally. So I look kind of like a half moon, so I figured that's cool. But anyway, a little more carb and bloody, but what the hell. Staffs and bundles. You can use stones, soils, findings from the area or areas, you know, things you find like bone, feathers, stuff like that, the perishable items. Remember, and you could see from our altars over in Grandfather's Camp that they're in various states of decay, and that's how they're meant to go. They keep going down, you know, into the return to the soil, so to speak, but the spirit cannot be destroyed. It is still there. When you hold the bundle or staff, you become connected immediately to the area or areas, and the conduit, the harmonic, is formed by and through you. So you become the conduit. That's the kind of conduit I'm using for you here. Is it my connection for decades to that area over there? You can also go the route of carvings, paintings, and symbols. One side note, when you're working on a staff or a bundle, you should be in the area where you want to preserve. Like if I'm working on a staff that's going to become a portal for Grandfather's Camp, I'll be working on it over there. That doesn't mean to say I can't work on it here or at home or whatever. It's just my mind and my spirit are over there when I'm doing the work to further that connection. I prefer to do it on site. Rick and I, when we were talking to each other, we would be carving or building our medicine bundles or whatever. We were in proximity to each other. Now, the area, it needs to be no bigger than a personal sit area. It depends on what you want to use it for. If we were going to use this as a huge gathering place where I have to accommodate 60, 70 people, oh my God, the area's got to be huge. But that's not the personality of this area. This is going to be small. It's going to be like opening a door to a tunnel. And that's a direct link to Grandfather's Camp area. And one person can access it any time, or a group of you. When you go home from here, you will have something from that area that links you to that area. So you, from at home on your altar, could grab that bundle or whatever it is and immediately use it as a portal. And as I said, it doesn't need to be any bigger than, you know, the personal sit area, but it can be a huge area. For instance, like the area around the Eternal Cave, that whole ravine valley that goes up to the Eternal Cave. It's, you know, it's vast. And that tends to be, the old animal trail that goes through there tends to be where my connection is to the Eternal Cave. The stuff I collected there on that path and then up at the lip of the cave, that dust. Or Panther Ridge, that whole rock outcropping where great-grandfather, you know, Shadow Walker and Windwalker had their visions. Now, usually the area has an earth mound and or a circle of stones depicting the center or the edge of that area. Now, let me explain it this way. When you're dealing with a small area, let's say you use stones to depict the area. Or an altar or a mound of earth. They're usually rectangular shaped, like so. In other words, it's predominant. And you can have them both. I prefer them both. You can put the stones in a pile in the middle, or that altar in the middle. And then you can approach it any angle or any way you can. But what that prevents you from doing, if it's a very small area, is sitting down within the portal to take a journey. That's why I like it to, you know, one of the edges of the portal, so you can go into the middle. And then physical, spiritual parts of creating the portal. Soil exchange, where the earth from one is brought to the other, and the other earth is brought. That's an earth link. Another one is a stone exchange. Whether the stone be very small or very large, it's transported from one to the other and vice versa. One of my favorites is a buried pictograph. We made one of these out, some of you were there, in Oregon Pipe, where we dug into the ground and then made a pictograph with all of the students depositing a stone and then covered it over. Camouflaged it. Only people that are in that group or people associated with them can find where those stones were buried, that exact location. That becomes a landmark portal. Transplantings, where small plants, generally ones that, you know, keep growing like little trees and stuff, are brought into the area. They don't have to be brought right into the center of the portal, but in somewhere around the portal. And then various collectibles, meaning like feathers, sticks, skulls, teeth, bones, whatever, they're going to biodegrade. So sometimes they can be wrapped into a bundle and buried in the ground. Other times they can be put right on the altar, just like is happening over in Grandfather's Camp. See, people don't realize when they place something on that altar, they make a connection from themselves to that altar. So basically, what I have to do is, at some point, I have to get some soil from Grandfather's Camp area and bring it here so it can be taken and put into that portal. And then I have to get soil that was taken out of that portal over to Grandfather's Camp area, which, as you can imagine, has been done enough times before. Now, as far as you're concerned, that portal will work when you're here. But what happens when you go home? You have the ability to take something from in or around that portal, like a little tiny handful of soil or a little stone, and bring that home with you and add it to your altar. Or your medicine bag or whatever else, where if you need to make that connection, you can reach out and pick up that stone. And it's like a handle of a door. And you're immediately connected to this area, which is connected to Grandfather's area, and all the connections that possesses. Like I said, I'm doing this off the top of my head because my notes for this are at home, but I'll spell this all out on the board. Now, let's focus on this portal. We want to link it to grandfather's camp area and ultimately to you when you go home. Now, don't take anything from the area yet. We have to wait till it builds power. We have to wait until that becomes an actual portal. And that won't happen until the dirt is exchanged, the stones and stuff like that. It'll start coming into its power. So one of the last things we'll do here as a class is you'll go over there and take something that you'll bring home with you. If it's going to go into a medicine bundle, you know, it could be a stick. You'll just delay the aging of that stick. You know, it's sitting in your medicine bundle, so to speak, and protected. But anyway, the first thing is we have to know that area. Now, and start to work on it. Now, here's my suggestion. We, of course, want to keep it secret from as much as possible from the Boy Scouts. Our initial movement in there is going to be, you know, we're going to trample down some stuff, we can't help it. A lot less than, you know, 4 people would from civilization, but still be aware of where you're walking. The elders are going to show it to you. Once you see it, this is the beauty of this, is before anything is done, I want the entire class to surround it as if it is a campfire in a way, or a ceremonial fire. That becomes the center. Now, this is going to be interesting because except for a very, very few members of Coyote Thunder, I haven't been able to do this before. As you stand around this potential portal, waiting for this doorway, so to speak, to open, of course, we have to voice our intents. And that's where we want to open our hearts. Not to words, but to the area. And even before there's a connection made physically, we can feel it spiritually. Now, instead of prayers or anything else, I'm going to ask you to go back and forth into that tidal vision. It won't take long. There's no ceremony. This goes beyond ceremony. This goes beyond the need for ceremony. Because what you're doing is you're looking at that portal, the potential portal, in a different way than anybody else would ever dream of looking at it, on a multitude of layers, feeling the connection right away. And then, ultimately, what we have to do is just lovingly create kind of a circle. Now, basically, it might mean cutting some small plants out or pulling them up and transplanting. That ain't gonna work well at this time of year. But we have to clear the ground a bit to accommodate the next steps. This first is like an introduction. And don't be surprised as you stand there and go back and forth with this tidal surge that tidal vision, that you start looking almost beneath the earth, like you're feeling a connection that runs right to grandfather's camp, even beginning just because you're standing there, just because of your history, your memory, your association with grandfather's camp. You are actually starting that process. You are starting that flow. that balance. And then decide where the parameters are going to be. In other words, this is the edge of the portal. And, you know, make it big enough to create somebody or somebodies, a couple of people, sitting comfortably. And then decide whether you're going to use rocks, stones, and an altar, or just an altar. And if you're going to use an edge altar, it should be in the direction of grandfather's camp. Now, sometime within the next, from now, after this is all over, the initial shaking of hands and, you know, the initial tidal vision, and the parameters are put in, sometime during the next 24 hours, or less than that, let's say 18 hours, I would like your group to go out there, stand around the portal as if you are the parameters, the frame, and open it in prayer for your group, both from your individual heart and your group heart, as also a messenger from the class in general, so you feel that connection. Feel it all the way back to grandfather's camp area, as if this invisible current. And many of you will actually feel it. When you initially surround it, and you start going into that tidal vision, you're going to feel that draw in that direction. You're going to feel it awaken. Let's do this. So meet out here in 5 minutes, 10 minutes. You got to go to the bathroom. It's not that far from here. Okay, it's just beyond the lake, the boathouse, and maybe 5-10 minutes. But remember, want to keep this out of Boy Scouts' prying eyes. Not that there's anything going to be there that they could see that's going to catch their attention. They'd have to be practically right on it to see. What I'm going to go with is, I think we're going to go with the circle of rocks and the altar. And the altar will be on the grandfather's camp side of it, so keep that in mind. The reason being is we'll certainly put soil there. It doesn't have to be a lot of soil to make the connection, but I like the idea that a lot of those rocks that are over in our camp area have been used for sweat lodge fires, they've been used for making tools. There's such a history of the tracker school in those rocks that's not just grandfather's area, that's the whole camp. So we're going to eventually use them. All right, let's do this, folks. Elders, let me meet you back here in a few minutes.